In 1993, an incident occurred in Las Vegas that puzzled both the police and the FBI for years. A young girl and an experienced criminal. Together they made an armored truck carrying $3 million disappear. That robbery happened in broad daylight, without a shot being fired, and without leaving a clue. After that, both vanished as if they had disappeared into thin air. The question is, how did they do it? And how did they avoid capture for so many years? Today's story is about 21-year-old Heist Tallchief. Heist was born in 1772 in Buffalo, USA. Her parents themselves were teenagers at the time. They were still in high school and addicted to alcohol and drugs. Heist's birth was the result of a relationship born of intoxication and irresponsibility. From childhood, Heist's home environment was quite bad. Her parents often invited friends home, drank, and then fought while intoxicated. Many times the matter escalated enough that the police were called to the house. Eventually that relationship broke, and they divorced. After the divorce, Heist went to live with her father, because she was given custody. But living with her father wasn't very good either. His home lifestyle was careless, and Heist was still living in an unstable environment. Once the father brought his new girlfriend home because she had nowhere to stay, and said she would look after Heist. But that woman did not like Heist at all. She often taunted her, saying that no one loved her. Even her own mother had left her. In 1987, when Heist turned 16, she left her father's house and went to live with her mother, who was now living in San Francisco. After arriving there, she finished her studies and obtained a general equivalency diploma. After that, she started working as a certified nursing assistant at a clinic. At that clinic, most patients were those who had contracted AIDS at a very young age. Many were only 20 years old. Heist tended to them, cared for them, and became attached to them. But whenever any of them left this world, her heart broke. Seeing death so closely at such a young age was very heavy for her. That pain deepened her old wounds from everything she had endured living with her father and his girlfriend. Heist now wanted to get away from that environment. But watching people die before her eyes every day had become unbearable. Meanwhile, a co-worker told her that taking crack lightens the mind and lessens the pain. At first, Heist refused, but gradually she too adopted the habit. The drug gave her temporary relief, but gradually the addiction took over her life. As a result, she lost her job and the addiction deepened further. Over time, Heist spent most of her time unemployed in bars and nightclubs. One day in a San Francisco bar, a man came up to her and asked if she could buy him a drink. Heist immediately said yes, because she didn't even have money for her own drink. That man was Roberto Solis, a notorious criminal whose crime story was long and infamous. In the 1960s, he had been involved in an attempt to rob an armored truck in San Francisco. During that attempt, he had shot and killed a security guard. For that, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But while in prison, Solis tried to change the course of his life. He began writing poems under the name Pando Aguila, which gradually became famous. His writing drew the attention of the literary world, and many prominent writers and intellectuals began demanding his release. In 1991, after about 23 years in prison, Roberto Solis was granted parole. His poems had gained significant recognition, and many well-known people were vocal in his support. That same year, Heist and Solis had their first meeting in a San Francisco bar. They talked for a long time. In the middle of drinks, Solis suddenly asked, "Do you believe in the devil?" Heist replied with a slight smile, "It depends on whether one believes in God or not." The conversation continued, and Solis invited her to his home. Heist went there. But what she saw was rather strange. In one corner of the room, a small altar was set up. It had a goat's head, crystal glass, and tarot cards. Different kinds of books were scattered about the room, mostly about strange beliefs, magic, and mysterious things. Some notebooks contained poems Solis had written himself. Heist clearly understood that Solis had a deep interest in mysterious and unusual things. When Heist first met him, she was broken inside. After losing her job, her life felt empty and she didn't know what to do next. But Solis changed her thinking. She felt that now she had a reason to live and someone who truly understood her. Living with Solis, she felt peace and belonging after a long time. Very quickly she began living with him. Solis also took very good care of her. He valued her and tried to keep her happy. Hader felt that at last she had the love and support she had always lacked. Hader knew about his criminal past, but she didn't care. On the contrary, she liked Solis's uncontrolled and adventurous life. She enjoyed living every day on a new turn where it was unpredictable what the next moment would bring. Once very late at night, Solis called Hader and said, "Get ready." Hader asked, "Where are we going?" Solis only said, "Get ready and bring clothes." The two left in the car and reached behind a mall. Solis told her to sit in the car and look after the keys and the vehicle. Meanwhile, he went inside and committed a theft. A little later, he returned carrying a lockbox. Inside it were approximately $0 and an expensive gold Rolex watch. Solis's bold and fearless habit always kept Hader on her toes. Being with him made every moment feel like an adrenaline rush. Despite the dangers, she could not stop herself from being part of such uncertain and exciting acts. Solis always thought about big earning, but working the traditional way did not fit his thinking. The money earned from 6 to 8 hours of labor did not suit his outlook. His ways of earning were always different and unusual. Sometimes selling a boat, sometimes dealing in arts and crafts, sometimes making a big gamble. With this mindset, in the summer of 1993, Solis took Hader to Las Vegas. He was certain that here he could win a big. Once there, he often spoke about his strange spiritual methods and sex magic, and tried to convince Hader that by these methods, they could earn so much wealth that they would never lack money again. At that time, Hader did not have a strong belief or purpose of her own, so Solis gradually molded her thinking by involving her in these practices. After that, Solis repeatedly told Hader to get a job at a cash handling company called Loomis. This company reportedly had about 3,000 armored vehicles that transported millions of dollars in cash between Las Vegas casinos and ATMs. You may recall that in 1969, Solis had been involved in a failed armed truck robbery in which he had shot a guard named Loomis Armored. That guard had also worked at this company. In other words, Solis was now planning to rob the same company again, only this time he wanted to use Hader to help from the inside. Because of his old connections with Loomis and his criminal history, he specifically wanted Hader to take this job. Hader applied for a security guard position at Loomis and was called for an interview. When asked in the interview whether she had done this work before, she clearly said no. Still, the company hired her. Perhaps because they needed to hire some women. Hader's job was to drive the armed van. With her were two other teammates, Scott Steve and Steve Marshall. At that time, Hader did not have much knowledge of the Vegas roads and had limited driving experience. It's possible she had obtained a driver's license only a few months before joining Loomis. One colleague even said that once Hader accidentally collided the truck into him. An armored truck team consisted of 3 people. Hader in the driver's seat and the other 2 handling the cash in the back. Their job was to refill and service ATMs installed especially in casinos at different places. In a few days, the van carried up to $4 to $5 million in cash, so that the may they always remain full. Hader began telling Silas about her daily work. Where does she go? Which routes does she take? And at which places does she stop? Sometimes Silas specifically asked which day the most cash is transported. That is, which days are heavy. Hader liked sharing details of her work, and Silas listened very carefully, asking questions in between. Gradually, Hader began to feel that from the information she was giving, Silas was forming a big plan in his mind. One day he planned to rob that same armored van. Shortly after, Silas told her to write down the daily routes for a week. Hader agreed and began keeping a full record of her work. Silas took those notes and himself started following those routes. Sometimes at night, sometimes during traffic hours, sometimes on weekends, so that he could understand every route and the surrounding environment well. He also observed what traffic was like on the way, what was happening nearby, and how the guards worked. Hader also told him which days she had the most packages, the days that were heavy. On those days, Silas himself would go and observe everything carefully, so that if they were to commit the robbery, he would already know what difficulties they would face. When Silas had gathered all the necessary information, he told Hader plainly, "Now we will rob that armored van." After that, Hader continued to tell him the cash handling process and other small details so that he could fully prepare. Hader told him that on one particular day of the week, Their first delivery was to the Circus Casino. There they only took out as much money as was needed to fill the casino's machines, and the rest of the cash remained in the van with Hayter. This was also a unique place, because here the guards were dropped off at one point and picked up from another. Usually they were unloaded at the basement door and then picked up from the main gate at the other end of the casino. That day the work also took a long time because 6 to 8 ATMs located in different parts of the casino had to be serviced. When Hayter gave these details to Silas, he immediately said the robbery should take place on that. The reason was clear. The guards would be busy inside for a long time, and if Hayter took the van and disappeared during that time, they would not become suspicious. On the contrary, they would think she had simply forgotten the pickup point as usual, and would be busy looking for her. This would give Silas plenty of time to work without drawing attention. After that, Silas rented a garage and arranged it to look as if steel work was being done on an armored van. He thought that if a van appeared parked there, no one would suspect anything. The plan was that after the theft, the van would be brought here, broken open, and all the cash taken out. Almost all the preparations were completed about 2 weeks before the operation. So the police had finalized the date, the first Friday of October, and they had also arranged a place to hide the van after the theft. Hayter felt both fear and confusion, but at this point she could not back out. Silas had already made it clear that if she refused, he would not tolerate. Even if Hayter hesitated, she would have to obey him. He began showing Hayter strange VHS tapes that were like hypnosis. Silas said these tapes would reduce Hayter's fear. They would keep her calm and increase her courage, so she could focus on the plan. He assured her that if she listened to him and did not get distracted, everything would go smoothly. Gradually, Silas also implanted in Hayter's mind that this job was her right. He said that because of the earlier robbery involving Loomis, many of his years had been wasted, and now he deserved revenge, and everything they got would rightfully belong to him. Hayter, who had already become deeply attached to Silas and loved him unconditionally, began to convince herself that this act was right, only for love's sake. She pushed aside all doubts and hesitations of the mind and resolved that she would support Silas no matter what. Over time, Hayter also began to feel that she too had a right to a rich and comfortable life. That thought made her stronger for this robbery. It seemed as if Silas had gained complete control over her mind. Now Hayter herself began to accept the plan as her own. They had even decided what they would do with the money after the robbery. Thoughts of an expensive and luxurious life dominated their decisions, and the line between right and wrong blurred. Almost all preparations were complete, but one big challenge remained. On the day of the robbery, Hayter had to get the van to the garage in less than an hour. Silas knew that as soon as the rest of the staff realized Hayter had vanished with the van, the entire Las Vegas police force would be searching for her. The real question was, how could such a large sum be moved so quickly without being noticed? Silas had a solution. He decided to run some test drives with Hayter before the real day, so she could learn the route under pressure and within the time limit without making mistakes. This would make her fully familiar with the route and the process, so that on the real day she could quickly get the van to the garage. After about 4 months of preparation and planning, the day finally arrived, the day of the robbery. Friday, October 1 began for Hayter like any other. At 8 a.m., she put on her duty uniform, but before leaving she watched that same VHS tape one last time, which was shown to her to help keep her calm and focused. From the outside she appeared perfectly normal and confident, but inside she was repeatedly running through the entire plan. Hayter reached the company where her two partners, Scott Sturt and Steve Marshall, were waiting to take the van. That day both noticed that Hayter was wearing slightly decorative shoes instead of her regular work boots. They found this a bit strange and even told the manager, but Hayter was lucky. The manager did not take the matter seriously and it ended there. Because it was Friday, it was necessary to fill all the ATMs for the weekend crowd. That day about $4 million in cash was loaded into the van. Hayter sat in the driver's seat with her two partners in the back, and they headed for their first service point, the Circus Casino. Hayter parked the van in the rear section of the casino and dropped off Scott and Steve. They had 4 bags with them, 2 bags of cash. They went inside to refill the ATMs. They took approximately $1 million to put into the machines so that the ATMs would remain fully stocked for the weekend customers, as mentioned earlier. As per the rules, Hayter was supposed to take the van to the casino's side entrance after this drop-off, where her partners would return after finishing the work. But that day Heather did not follow that routine. Instead of taking the van to the side entrance, she began driving it away from the casino. Meanwhile, after Scott and Steve had finished refilling all the casino's ATMs, they went toward the place where they thought Heather would be waiting for them to leave. But neither Heather nor the van were there. At first they thought Heather might have lost her way, been stuck in traffic, or had been in a minor accident. Steve thought she might still be at the drop-off point, so both returned to the basement entrance. But there was no sign of Heather or the van there either. Stuck outside the casino, they immediately called their office. Shortly after, another armored van came to pick them up. Meanwhile, the surrounding area was also checked, but there was no trace of Heather or the van. Attempts were made to contact them by radio and phone, but there was no response. Finally, the police were alerted. The police also searched the entire area, but the result was the same, no clues. At first it was suspected that Heather had been kidnapped, but when the casino's security footage was reviewed, the real truth came out. The video clearly showed Heather. She was seen driving the van away from the casino, and passing the point where she was supposed to pick up her partners. There were no signs of force or struggle. After seeing this evidence, the police concluded that Heather herself had planned to take about $3 million and run. Within an hour of the robbery, every police car in Las Vegas was searching for Heather and the stolen van. But by then Heather had already reached the garage they had rented for the robbery. Solis was waiting for her inside. As soon as Heather drove the van into the garage, Solis immediately closed the door. It was then that Heather realized Solis's attitude had suddenly changed. He was no longer the loving partner he had been, but a man who commanded like a leader. First he took the gun from Heather and told her to change clothes. Solis knew that as soon as news of the theft spread, the police would be looking for a woman in that uniform, and her photo would be circulated in the media. He had already planned that once the van was in the garage, Heather's identity would be completely changed. For this he had prepared an old woman's disguise, a wheelchair, a gray wig, and fake glasses, so they could blend into the crowd without arousing suspicion. Heather quickly changed her clothes, put on the wig and glasses, and went to where Solis was emptying the cash bag. The money was bound in bundles, $20, $50 and $100 notes, all vacuum sealed so they looked hard and compact like bricks. They began filling these bundles into large boxes, and then placing them into the trunk of a car. They worked very quickly, because every second was precious. The police were searching for them, and they had to leave before being caught. The adrenaline was so high that the two hardly spoke to each other. They communicated only with looks and hand signals. When all the boxes were loaded into the car, it was time to leave. Solis was driving and Heather was hiding low in the passenger footwell. Solis's plan was to flee by plane, but it wasn't possible to take such large boxes along. So he stopped the car near a post office, unloaded the boxes, and shifted them to a safe address from where they could be retrieved later. During this time, Heather put in contact lenses to change her look, so that no one would recognize her at the airport. Then they headed toward the airport. Police cars, sirens and helicopters, hovering above, were constantly visible along the route, but Solis remained completely calm and focused. He told Heather to keep her head down so as not to attract attention. Hearing the helicopters, Heather realized that her life had now begun as that of a fugitive. In fact, a week earlier Solis had booked a private jet for them. Upon arriving at the airport, the jet was ready and waiting on the runway. A steward brought a wheelchair, and Heather, disguised as the old woman, boarded the plane without suspicion. Solis had paid attention to every small detail so that the trip would be completed without any alarm. The jet took off and they headed for Denver, Colorado. Meanwhile, the police were still searching the casino.
They had no idea that both of them had already crossed the state border. As soon as the jet rose into the sky, Solis and Heather breathed a sigh of relief. For the time being, they had escaped capture. But because stealing cash from a casino was a federal crime, the case was immediately handed over to the FBI. It was assigned to FBI Special Agent Job Duchik, who was known for being an expert in catching fugitives. With his reputation on the line, Duchik made up his mind that no matter where Solis and Heather were, he would catch them. Duchik and Las Vegas police detectives immediately got to work. The first place they went was the apartment building where Heather lived. They broke open the door, but inside they found an empty room. No trace of Heather, no trace of Solis. The room was messy, and in one corner was a shrine filled with strange objects. It looked as if it was connected to some kind of satanic ritual or cult. There were also many books about different travel destinations. FBI agents suspected that maybe all this was a trap,
a way to mislead them and buy Solis and Heather more time to escape. While searching the room, they found a closet with only one shirt hanging inside, a Loomis Company uniform shirt. Meanwhile, about 2 hours after the robbery, Solis and Heather's private jet had landed in Denver. They got off the plane, got into a car that was already waiting for them, and left the airport. Then they went to a motel where, a week before the robbery, they had left some clothes. When they arrived, they quickly changed their disguises and left without wasting time. On the other side, the FBI agents had very few leads. They couldn't figure out where Solis and Heather could have gone. They were afraid that if they didn't act quickly, the two would completely disappear. Under this pressure, Agent Job Duchik decided to release their information to the public as soon as possible, hoping that someone might recognize them and give a tip. He issued a public appeal about Solis and Heather, and also contacted different agencies such as metro stations and bus stations. Then he went to McCarran International Airport's FAA office and searched the records of nearly 1,800 flights. During this search, he found a private jet that had taken off at the exact time Solis and Heather disappeared. As soon as Duchik found the record of that private jet, he immediately began investigating in that direction. He and the other FBI agents contacted the jet's pilot and asked about Heather. Since at that time they still didn't have much information about Solis, the pilot immediately recognized Heather and told them that she was with another man. He also described Heather's look, completely changed, wearing a gray wig and sitting in a wheelchair, looking like an elderly woman who could barely move. From this, the agents realized that 21-year-old Heather was disguising herself as an old woman. At the same time, Heather's pictures in the news of the robbery became national headlines. The FBI placed her at the very top of their most wanted list. After leaving the motel, Heather and Solis took a taxi that brought them to the train station. From there, they boarded a train to St. Louis, and then to New Orleans. In New Orleans, Heather bought some clothes from a shop, and then both of them set off toward Miami. 2 days after the robbery, they reached Miami. While a taxi was taking them to a motel, Heather overheard the driver quietly say, "Wow, you two got away." Heather immediately told Solis about this, and insisted they should leave right away or else they might get caught. Solis tried to calm her down, saying she was just overthinking it, but Heather was sure she had heard correctly. Even so, Solis kept convincing her that they were completely safe and there was no need to worry. The next day, Solis went to collect the money while Heather stayed in the motel room. A few hours later, Solis returned with the same stolen cash from the armored truck. Heather sighed with relief, and in her excitement, poured the money out of the plastic bag and spread it into a pile. She lay down on the pile as if she was savoring their victory and success. Solis looked at her with a smile, happy that they had managed to pull off the robbery without any major obstacles. After that, both of them started packing the cash into 2 large suitcases and began planning their next move to avoid capture. Solis then left the motel room with the suitcases, giving Heather strict instructions not to leave the room under any circumstances. By this time, the news had spread everywhere, and Heather had to remain completely low profile for a while. Almost every media channel was reporting on the robbery. Heather's pictures were being shown again and again, and a reward had been announced for any information leading to her arrest. Heather watched Solis leave, her mind filled with both excitement and nervousness about what the future held. She knew they would have to be extremely careful now, so that neither the police nor any official could spot them. Meanwhile, 10 days after the robbery, Agent Job Duchik's team received their first solid lead. After Heather's photo went viral in the media, a man called in and said that he had rented a warehouse to a couple and suspected they were involved in the robbery. The FBI rushed to the warehouse and found the stolen armored truck inside. They lifted fingerprints from the scene and sent them to the FBI's identification division. The report confirmed that the prints belonged to Heather Tallchief and Roberto Solis. Now the FBI had the confirmed identities of both suspects, and the manhunt intensified. After this major breakthrough, agents began digging into Solis's criminal record. They discovered that he had already served prison time for attempting an armed robbery and had a long history of violence. They also learned that during his time in prison, he had mastered the art of persuasion and manipulation. And since Heather was young, emotionally weak, and easily influenced, agents suspected that Solis was simply using her as a pawn in his crime. They believed that if Solis had the chance to keep the entire USD 3.1 million for himself, why would he share it? Apart from greed, there was another reason. Heather was a witness to the crime. Given Solis's past criminal record,
The FBI was convinced that once he secured the money, he might even kill her. That's why it was urgent to catch Solis as soon as possible, not only to recover the money, but also for Heather's safety. The FBI then released pictures of Solis and Heather across almost every TV channel and news report, urging people to immediately provide information if they knew anything about their whereabouts. The media coverage made this case a hot topic nationwide, and a massive national search operation was launched, involving volunteers and multiple law enforcement agencies. Despite such a huge search effort and the fact that all eyes were on them, Solis remained calm and confident. On the other hand, Heather was scared and restless, constantly worrying about being caught and what would happen to her if they were. She also had another fear. Had she now become a liability for Solis? Was she no longer useful to him? At this point, the situation was such that they couldn't go out in public anywhere because of the risk of being recognized. So Solis befriended a girl named Marlon to help with outside errands. Marlon would go shopping for them and bring necessary supplies while the two stayed hid. This arrangement proved very useful, since Marlon could move freely in the crowd without suspicion, and handle all the outside work. Gradually, Marlon's help became essential for them. But for Heather, Marlon also brought a little bit of strength. Marlon was younger than Heather, and whenever Solis spent too much time with her, or gave her too much attention, Heather felt jealous. As already mentioned, Heather was deeply attached to Solis, and seeing him with another woman bothered her. Still, Heather knew Marlon's help was necessary for their survival, so she kept her emotions hidden. At one point, Solis and Marlon took the suitcases full of cash and flew on a private jet to St. Martin, leaving Heather alone in the motel room. Meanwhile, the FBI also knew that transporting USD 3.111 million in cash was not easy. The weight alone would require 8 to 10 suitcases. They contacted UPS and the post office and discovered that before leaving Las Vegas, Solis and Heather had shipped some boxes. By tracing the delivery addresses of those packages, agents tracked their trail to Miami, Florida, and prepared to move there. This was about a month after the robbery. By then, Solis and Marlon had already left Miami, but Heather was still living there alone, moving from place to place to avoid capture. She spent most of her time lying on the bed or watching TV. But being in Miami with so much cash close at hand sparked a thought in her mind. Why not enjoy this moment a little? She thought of exploring the city, shopping and dining at good restaurants. Heather also wanted to get a haircut, so she went to a hairdresser. But the hairdresser told her she couldn't cut her hair at that time because she had a show that night. Then she asked Heather if she wanted to come with her to see the show. For a while, Heather forgot about her life as a fugitive and accepted the offer, going with her to the show. Meanwhile, FBI agents received information that Heather had rented a motel room. They immediately rushed there to see if she was still inside, but by then, Heather had already checked out and was out in the city. For the agents, it was yet another missed opportunity, increasing their frustration. By this time, 2 months had passed since the robbery, and Heather and Solis were still out of police reach. During this period, Solis and Marlon were in St. Martin in the Caribbean, while Heather was still in Miami, constantly changing locations to avoid capture. One day, Solis contacted Heather and told her that he had rented a place in St. Martin. He sent her the address, and Heather traveled there. When she arrived, she saw Solis and Marlon enjoying the Caribbean sun together. Heather knew Marlon's help was necessary, but seeing Solis so close to her still bothered her. Sometime later, Marlon went back to Miami, leaving Heather alone with Solis. Despite her initial jealousy, Heather began enjoying her time with Solis. She realized how important his support and presence were for her during their fugitive life. Solis and Heather were still on the run, and remained on the FBI's.
They were still at the top of the FBI's most wanted list. Looking at Solis's criminal history, he was not the kind of man who would easily surrender. On the contrary, he believed that facing death was better than going back to prison. He had decided that no matter what the circumstances were, he would put in his full strength to avoid capture. Because of this, they bought a lot of weapons, and Solis started teaching Heather how to use an AK-47. Along with that, he also showed her techniques for accurate shooting. He believed that in the life of being a fugitive, survival was only possible if they were prepared for every situation. Heather doubted whether she could actually shoot someone, but she also understood that if she wanted to protect herself and Solis, she might have to do it when necessary. Solis assured her that this was just a matter of survival and that they had to be ready at all times. Heather, who was now a fugitive criminal, was living hidden in a villa in St. Martin,
while Solis was looking for a way to obtain fake documents for them. Things like passports, birth certificates, or citizenship papers. They knew that the only way to leave the country without being caught was to create a new identity. Because of Solis's contacts, Heather believed this could be possible. During this time, Heather found out that she was pregnant. This news brought even more pressure into their already difficult life. Heather was confused. She couldn't believe that at 21 years old, living a life on the run, she was now going to be a mother. She was ready to die, but not ready to give birth to a child in such circumstances. The news of her pregnancy made it even more urgent for them to create new identities and leave the country. They started thinking about where to go and how to get passports. That's when Solis learned about a Dutch agency that could provide such documents. After that, he started looking into countries from where they couldn't be extradited back to the US, and at that time, the Netherlands seemed like a safe option. With this plan, they reached Amsterdam, where they tried to blend into the city's culture and environment. About 8 months after the robbery, Heather gave birth to a son in a hospital in Amsterdam. The child's birth certificate was prepared in Dutch, with the name Emilio Martin. The mother's name was written as Tony Martin, and the father's name was left blank. At that time, they didn't have a solid plan. They were just living day by day, thinking about the future of their new family in a foreign country. After becoming a mother, Heather started seeing things from a different perspective. It was no longer just about Solis and his plans, but about creating a safe and stable future for her son. She knew that somehow, she had to build a better life for her family and stay away from the world of crime in Amsterdam. While Heather and Solis were trying to manage their new life there, in the US, FBI agents were still struggling with false information. Most people were giving fake tips for the reward money. Because of continuous false leads and no solid evidence, the FBI began to believe that maybe Heather and her partner would never be caught. In international fugitive cases, when more than 24 months pass, they often go cold and become difficult to solve. Heather and Solis had vanished as if into thin air, making it a major challenge for the FBI to catch them. Time passed, and in 1995, about 18 months after the robbery, Solis went back to St. Martin to wrap up some unfinished business, because part of the money was still left there. But when he returned, he brought along a new woman. As mentioned earlier, Heather loved Solis deeply, and believed that he loved her back too. But at that moment, she realized that for him she was just a tool. Just a pawn used in his crime. Maybe he never loved Heather at all, and she had only been deceiving herself the whole time. This realization was a huge shock for Heather. Now it became clear to her that distancing herself from Solis was the right path for her and her son. She was ready to start a new life in Amsterdam, far away from the toxic world Solis had created. When she told Solis about her decision, he neither asked questions nor showed regret. This attitude only confirmed her belief that leaving him was the right choice. With pain in her heart but also a little relief, Heather began preparations for a new beginning. She had some money with which she was paying rent, buying milk and diapers for her son, and covering other essential expenses. But she knew this money wouldn't last long. To create a stable future, she had to work. Being a mother, Heather couldn't take jobs with long shifts. In such a situation, she found one path that seemed most suitable: escort work. The hours were flexible, the money was good in less time, and it left her with enough to care for her son. Despite the stigma attached to this work, Heather knew that at this moment, for her son, this was the best option. Her biggest goal was to ensure her son had a normal childhood, and she was ready to go to any lengths for it. Through a contact, she managed to obtain British passports for herself and her son. Now their life began with new names, Dylan and Donna Eden. But Heather knew that this identity would only last 10 years. Once the passports expired, this fake identity would also end. Slowly she settled into everyday life. Now her focus was only on ensuring her son went to school, studied, and had the environment of a stable home. During this time, a man entered their life who accepted both Heather and her son, as if they had found a ready-made family. Heather was happy in this new life, where she was hiding openly. Time went on. By 2000, 7 years after the robbery, Heather was still trying to adjust to her new identity. But inside, she was tired of living under someone else's name. This fake reality often made her sad. She wanted that one day she could live openly with her true identity and leave her past behind forever. But time was running out. The passport's expiration date was approaching, and soon she had to renew it. The question was, would she find the real Donna to renew the passport? Or would she create another fake identity? And how long could she keep telling her son that they had to change their names again? Heather was now exhausted from this false life, and tired of constantly looking over her shoulder. Finally, in 2005, 12 years after the robbery, Heather decided that she would surrender herself to the authorities. She was tired of living in fear and was ready to face the consequences of her crime. She wrote a letter to a lawyer in the U.S., clearly stating that she needed help to surrender in court and face the upcoming legal proceedings. In such high-profile cases, big criminal lawyers often take interest, and this lawyer also agreed to take her case. After that, he started creating a full legal strategy for Heather, so she could fight her case safely within the system. Heather had made her decision, but the real challenge was about to begin. The lawyer's plan was clear: bring Heather to the U.S. and surrender her directly in Las Vegas, the same city where the bank robbery had taken place. This would show that she had come back of her own will and was taking responsibility for her crime. Heather's biggest concern was not the sentence, but she made it clear that her biggest goal was to secure U.S. citizenship for her son, so that he could live a normal and safe life. The lawyer promised to prioritize this in the case, and also try to reduce her sentence. The plan was that if Heather came on her own to surrender, her regret and cooperation would be clearly visible to the judge, which might help reduce the punishment. But there was also a big risk. If she was caught anywhere before reaching the U.S., the situation could become much worse. Still, the lawyer believed that this risk was worth taking. Before going to America, Heather started preparing for separation from her son. This was the hardest step for her because she didn't know when she would meet him again. Maybe after a few months, or maybe after many years. But she knew that this sacrifice was necessary for his better future. She explained to her son how much she loved him, and that she would try to fix everything no matter what. On September 15, 2005, Heather arrived in America. Her heart was heavy, but she was also brave. She was ready to surrender herself to the authorities and face the legal punishment for her crime. Heather returned on a British passport, so during airport checkout, she used the British accent she had been practicing for weeks. Luckily, all the security checks went smoothly. Outside the airport, her lawyer was waiting for her. As soon as they met, he took her straight to federal court so that Heather could officially surrender and start the legal process. At that moment, Heather's heart felt both fear and relief. She felt that by facing her fear, she had achieved a small victory. Heather clearly said that she was tired of running and just wanted Dylan to live a normal life. She explained that she had waited only so she could take care of her son and make him understand what crime she had been accused of. Now she didn't care about the prison sentence, because after surrendering, a huge weight had lifted from her heart. For the first time in many years, Heather felt freedom and a clear conscience. She had resolved that in prison, she would learn from her past, improve herself, and come out ready to start anew as a stronger person. Heather's lawyer explained that she was facing several serious charges: running away with entrusted money, bank fraud, bank robbery, fleeing across state lines to escape the case, giving false statements, illegally transporting weapons and cash across state borders, and using fake passport. With these charges, Heather could easily face 20 to 25 years in prison, but the lawyer hoped that since she had surrendered on her own, the prosecutors might show some lenience. During sentencing, Heather pleaded guilty to 2 cases of running away with entrusted money, and 1 case of making a fake passport. As a result, her sentence was reduced to just 5 years. Despite the serious charges, her cooperation and acceptance of responsibility turned out to be the biggest factors in the outcome of her case. On June 1, after that, she spent the next 5 years on probation, during which she tried to rebuild her life and her identity. The path was not easy, but Heather had resolved that she would make up for her past crimes and live as a better person in the future. As for Roberto Solis, he is still a fugitive today and remains on the FBI's most wanted list.